Good evening and welcome to ICC Thursday night HenChess Banner Blitz. In the words of that famous comedian, let's do the dang thing. So, I guess we could open it up to a few challenges, and otherwise we will get on with our very special bishop pair presentation tonight. So let's see, /open, give it a minute, see who's around, and otherwise I can say down here in Florida, the Sunshine State, getting pounded with rain this evening. So I just spent 90 minutes on the road coming back from school, but I made it here so we can be together. Okay. But in all fairness, the last couple of weeks we've had amazing weather here in Florida. 65 at night, 75 during the day. So I would take it like 90% of the time. This is Internet Chess Club, and Mr. Sandro is with us. Okay, so it looks like audio and everything is functioning. Zevich, good evening, sir. Tough games we had last week. Are you up to a game, or should I dive right into the bishop pair presentation? Very special presentation tonight. I think I'm actually going to show 3 or 4 games from my practice where somehow I managed to get the bishop pair. Speaking of which, I realized I didn't include a game against Nigel Short from Hastings when he was about 16 years old, where I got the bishop pair, and he had a tremendous attack, and I managed to survive, and then little domination themes in the end game. But that was a pretty long game. I think I picked some other games. So anyway, oh, Massey, 5-0 rated. What the heck. And this guy always plays the opening so well. What was I going to play? I was going to play something different against him. Let's see what he does against this. So this is the Owens defense. My buddy Foxy Openings has been advocating this of late. And of course, Chessables probably has some kind of thingy on it. Course, Ron. Chess course. Thank you there. I don't know if I needed to be in such a rush to castle. Good move. There goes any plans I had for bishop a6 and whatever. Now, what should I be doing? Should I be playing queen e7 in there? This queen is definitely going to e7. Let's say hello to that rook. Let's get this guy over here. This guy definitely likes to test my defensive skills, such as they are or not. Yep, that's a direct hit. I'm not sure about F5, to be honest. Not that we need to be honest, but now I would have really liked to have played E5, but of course he's not going to let that happen. Let's just get this king out of trouble. Fascinating struggle, to be sure. Not sure. Good game, though, as always. Oh, whoa. Damn it, didn't mean to leave that go. Language, Ron. Language. Did not mean to give up that one. But, let's see what happens next. Now the interesting thing here is that usually they're the ones sacking the pawns and I'm the one trying to attack me. Here I'm the one that sacrificed the pawn and I'm trying to attack them. Not very well, but trying. Well, at least I can claim I got a mobile pawn center. Okay, what next? Okay, I got my pawn back. The one that I didn't mean to give away. Or at least I think I got it back. Okay, time's a little bit of an issue here. Okay, that's a little check. And that's a mate threat. Oh no, sir. That's checkmate. Oh, what a game. What a game. Yeah, knight to g2 I thought was kind of what I was expecting. I kind of thought knight g2 was forced. Well, sir, as always, good game. I got a whole rating point for that? Woohoo! Rack 'em, baby. Okay, good game, sir. Foxy Openings is here. Okay. Okay, why not? Do the dang thing. What are we going to play against this guy? I played g3. Let's see if that slows down his Owen's defense. Nope. Didn't seem to. Miles did something like that to me once in a tournament in Manchester. I was like going to play some kind of specific opening, and he played like 1g3 and like totally threw me out of my rhythm. And well, I was going to castle, but yeah, not just rush to let him know where we live. I think we have a few more useful type looking moves that we can play. See, there he comes. He's over that way. Not sure why I played rook c1, because I'm just sitting there thinking I don't want to rush to castle. Duh. And then what I do, I go and play rook c1, which kind of means I'm going to have to go queenside more than likely. Okay, so now I'd like to play. Okay, let's do this. Well, now we know where he lives. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I'd kind of like to play pawn takes pawn, but the problem is he'll take with a knight, which looks very active. And the reason it looks very active is because it is very active. So, what to do? Now, one thing about rook c1 is he doesn't have this little b5 trick. Trying to use, aha, but see, now he's thinking about playing it. Okay, let's bite the bullet, let's get castled. But now, what's my plan for progress? Well, this is compulsory. And I don't really want to rush to play f4, although I could play f4 and on pawn takes not take with the pawn and let him have knight h4, but take with this guy. Okay, there's a plan. And I didn't want to play d5 because he's all geared up to play cd, cd, and then b5. And plus I don't have good control over the d3 square here. So this is interesting because now I have various options like fe, fe, d5, getting a passed pawn. I also have options of de, de, f5, getting a big space advantage on that side. In fact, that feels like the deal. And here's what I was saying. If I'd have taken with the pawn there, it looks impressive. But then he would have... Okay, now this is a little tricky. Oh, not so tricky. Now we're going to take with the pawn. So what was the difference? The difference was he doesn't have a knight coming to h4. Aha. I knew there was some logic. I mean, I was thinking take with the knight, take with the rook, then he goes knight h5 with tempo. Now, he might still go knight h5 with tempo, but, well, this could be full speed straight ahead of him. Where is he going? Well, let's just charge straight ahead and see what happens. See what shakes loose from the cherry tree. Aha, he's taking that way. Yeah, if I take with the f-pawn, he's going to get that g5 square. Okay, so man up, take this way. Try to have some hopes of knight d4, pawn to c5, and well, originally on that move I was going to play bishop e4. Stick to the plan. That clears the g file for my rook. If he takes on h3, of course I'm taking his horse with check. Ron, those are called knights. Thank you, sir. Such useful information. Now if he takes, do we take with the queen and centralize her, or do we take with the horse? I was thinking take with the knight. I mean, knight a4, threatening to go there, especially now that this bishop has escaped, doesn't make much sense. Key moment here is I'm now contemplating pawn to f5, cracking him open. Oh, he plays f5. Now that's interesting. And he's got g5 to potentially follow. I don't really want to take on passant. Knight to d6, I really wanted to have my pawn up on c5 when I play knight to d6. But still, maybe not bad. But then he'll take and his knight will come back into the game. So, by process of elimination, let's do this one. Very murky business here. This is not all that great for me, to have to say. But who knows? Should I have been rotating the knight to e2 up to d4? I'm counting here that if he takes, I'm going to take rook takes, and then I'm going to double on the file. That's the plan. Whether that will concern him or not, it doesn't look like it. I keep thinking maybe I want to play pawn to c5, but I'm not so sure. I mean, I give up a lot, I lose some serious light squares. Oh wow, partying on. Holy waterbeds, Batman. I think I got to take that. Oh, I see. He's a bit short on time. He may have missed this queen checkers. This is a good check. Plus, I knocked that pawn out, or I could just take this guy. I think if we take this guy, we hit his bishop. I think we got good chances of collecting the g4 pawn anyway. I thought I could take this. What am I missing? Okay. Woo! Good game up to g4, I think. And then after g4 is a bit tricky. Mr. Massey, already played you one game, sir. I think we're going to go do the bishop pair presentation. But Foxy, stick around. By the way, Foxy has opening videos by Susan Polgar, Roman Jinjin-Hashvili, the industrious Andrew Martin, and moi, and Polgar. And so, and he also helps us out with the editing and so forth for these shows. Anyway, stick around, Foxy. I got a lot of time tonight, and maybe we'll get some more games in, you and Mr. Massey. But right now, we're going to take a break here, /open, and action window, view, my profile. And so, by the way, a little bit of chess news. Oh, Savage, no worries, buddy. It's just as I mentioned to Mr. Sandro earlier, I had a 90-minute drive in our South Florida rain, so probably should get the presentation done while I still got a little energy go. Okay, so, but a little bit of news this week. Faruza, who is looking like the heir apparent to one day World Championship, has now moved up to number 3 on the FIDE rating list, behind only Magnus Carlsen and Ding Liren, because in the European Championships, I think he scored something like 4 wins and 1 draw so far. Not sure what happened today, but pretty amazing. And he's only 18 years old, which is really amazing because if you look at the list of, like, say, the top 10 players, after him, Geary is 27, and the rest of them are like 29, 30. And then, of course, there's our boy Iranian Bughouse player, recent U.S. transplant, is like the oldest at age 38, okay? So at 18, he's like 8 or 9 years younger than the next player on the top 10 list. So absolutely amazing. But here we have games. So right here, you'll see our last couple of games that we just played, most recent games, okay? And then we have our game library, holds up to 400 games. And so I like to put my presentation games in there so that I can share with everyone. And let's see. So the last group of games that we saw some incredible games: Illuskasis versus Leko, Tiviaka versus Nasri, Batista versus Panamaria was a superb game. And then we saw this set of games here in the Bishop's Opening. So tonight we're going to take a look at 1, 2, 3, 4 games from my own practice. Okay? So let's see. Who are we playing here? Here I'm white against Perry Youngworth. This was in one of the Lone Pine tournaments. Lone Pine, California in the 80s. It was run by a millionaire. Louis D. Statham had made some kind of invention to help the oil industry or whatever and retired. And he went to the small town of Lone Pine, California, which is like on the way from like LA to Las Vegas. And it's literally, honest to goodness, one traffic light. But for a period in the 70s, they would run tournaments where they would bring the best players they could. They'd bring a couple of top players from overseas, like unheard of at that time, but they would invite a couple of top Russian players. During the years there, I saw Smyslov, I saw Petrosian, I saw Larson, got to see some great names, guys that you normally wouldn't see, and then based on rating qualifications, some of the top young juniors. So during the years, guys like Christensen, Fedorowicz, myself, Sirewan, Michael Rode, we'd all play in the tournament, okay? And it was a huge experience for that generation. Mark Deason. It was a huge experience for that generation of young American players at a time when there were not a lot of international tournaments. So, in one of the tournaments, I'm playing Perry Youngworth, okay? So at that time, I'd already switched, I guess, to D4. And I play the very classical variation of the King's Indian against the King's Indian defense. Castles and Knight C6 is the most theoretical variation, and that's the long lines with D5, Knight E7, and then, white has various ninth move alternatives. But here he played Knight BD7, and that's actually Zurich 53 at the time when the King's Indian defense first came into prominence. That, with Knight D7, is kind of how they played the black side. Then later it was determined that Knight C6 was a bit sharper, a bit more imbalanced, and the Knight D7 was maybe borderline on the passive side. Anyway, at that time, I did some work with my friend, International Master Dr. Carl Berger, had excellent understanding of the game. And somewhere around there, I think before, he'd actually won a nice game against Grandmaster Anatoly Lane, playing white. And he played this system, and we developed this system, we worked on it, with Queen C2 and Rook to D1. Well, obviously, the Rook on D1 is X-raying the Queen, okay? And so let's see, he went Rook E8. But now it's not so clear the Rook belongs so well on E8. Queen E7 might have been a better choice. I think Lombardi once mentioned to me Queen E7 with the idea you can play Knight E8 to C7 to E6. I think Lombardi mentioned something like that. Anyway, against rook e8, I now play bishop f1. He spins a tempo with a5. Well, pluses and minuses, as always in chess. a5 does hold me back from playing pawn to b4. But the downside is it weakens the b6 square. Well, of course, at this long distance, looking through the telescope, you can say, well, Ron, the knight on d7, the queen, they're covering the b6 square. But watch how play develops. Play pawn takes pawn. Very timely capture. Now, of course, knight takes means he would have to take with the rook. Then f4, e5 might be a little go-go juice for the A team. So, pawn takes. But here's the point. Remember I told you that b6 square could be weak? Watch this. We play this move c5, taking advantage of the pin on the d file and clamping down on this b6 square. Well, he goes queen e7. Go knight a4. Now you can see he's got two attackers, I got two defenders. Now, he played h6. The super critical theoretical line is for him not to let me get a bind. I'm one move away, two moves, h3 and bishop e3, from having a grip on the position. Therefore, he needs to play energetically with bishop f8. And I need a sip of Gatorade, even though they are not a sponsor of the show. Okay, let's get rid of that rabbit in the throat or whatever. He didn't realize that how critical the situation is here, and he played h6. Well, h6 is kind of a typical move in terms of you want to keep me from playing, say, a move like bishop g5, or maybe you want to try and play knight h5 and f5. But now, the little quiet move h3. Well, why is h6 not good for him and h3 is good for me? Because I want to play bishop to e3 and really secure that c5 pawn without being harassed with knight to g4. h6 on his part doesn't have an equivalent type plan. Maybe he could try to play a g5 type attack, but then strategically that tends to be pretty dubious, although possible since this knight has wandered away. This would be the natural knight to go to e2 to g3 to f5. But let's see what happens. Plays rook f8. Well, rook f8 is already kind of admitting that rook e8 probably was not the most precise, and there you have it, bishop e3. That pawn on c5 is in there. Now goes knight e8, because I was already contemplating rook to d6. What would be the best answer for white if bishop f8? Great question. Going back on h6, if he plays bishop f8, there's a very long line, if I remember, where you go bishop e3, knight to g4, bishop to g5, f6, bishop back to d2, knight takes c5, knight to b6, rook to b8, h3, kick that knight back to h6, and then bishop takes on a5, you get your pawn back. I know you're like, thank goodness I asked. And, you know, at the end it's either equal or maybe 0.40 for white. But again, it requires black to know it. Not so easy to find over the board. Okay. But anyway, in the game, rook f8, bishop e3, knight e8, and boom! Hit him where it hurts. Knight to b6. I'm in. Well, here's his problem. If he plays knight takes and I play pawn takes, then bishop to c5 is coming, and it's pretty awkward. So in the game, what did he do? He played rook to b8. But now, I know he wants to play f5. It's clear he wants to play f5, f4. That's his plan for upsetting my configuration. But timing is everything. Timing is critical in chess. Bam! I get there first. Now, if he plays f4, I have time to play rook takes, bishop takes, rook takes, tempo on the queen, and then save my bishop. So he's not in time. I got this nasty threat to play rook takes knight. Well, he wants to keep the knight on the board, so he comes back. But now we knock out the bishop pair. And the light squared bishop tends to be his good bishop. As you can see, his dark squared bishop's a bit blocked in. Not only that, his light squared bishop was the guy defending the f5 pawn. So, first things first, bishop check. And he probably should have gone to h8. But if he goes to h8, I get knight to h4 with mega tempo. So, he went to h7. Bishop check was nasty. Now I play pawn takes pawn. Of course, if he plays pawn takes pawn, queen takes on f5 check, hits the king, hits the rook on c8. So he plays e4 to complicate. But now, knight to the rim, the future's not dim at all. Threatens knight takes g6. If he takes on f5, I can take with the knight, which I think is what happened in the game. Yeah, and he can't even play g5. And notice his knights are disconfigured to even protect the g6 square. So he's basically just getting shredded here on the light squares. Well, he took. Now I take with the knight, queen up, and how can I resist? Yeah, you could play moves like g4, but why loosen your own king side? No, just simply grab the second bishop. So of course we can say the opening has been a monster success for white. I got two bishops, I'm doubled on the d file, and I got the extra pawn. I think Roman, with his dry sense of humor, in a position like this once said something to the effect, white has the compensation and the pawn. Roman was great. Okay, so bishop d4. Line it up. Look at all that meat on that diagonal. Queen, knight, knight. But we also cleared the e-file. Why did we clear the e-file? Well, we want to switch targets. Boom. Now we start threatening possibilities of bishop takes knight and removing the e4 pawn. Once we remove the e4 pawn, we'll have a 3-to-1 majority. That'll guarantee 2 connected pass pawns in almost any endgame. Easy technical win. So he connects the knights. Now, of course, the one way to lose a game like this is to play a move like g4, trying to pawn fork them, letting them sacrifice, get to your king, and be a King's Indian defense hero. No, 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 no. We don't go for such stuff. We play f3. f3 gives us lateral defense. After all, g2 is probably about the only square he can checkmate us on. But we also exploit this pin. There's a lot of juice on this diagonal. There's a pawn, a queen, and a king. And no light squared bishop for black. Well, he brings over some reinforcements, but now pawn takes, rook takes, and we switch files again. Rook to f1. Now you can see there's a lot of juice on the, a lot of meat on the f file here, and even more meat on the diagonal. A rook, a queen, a king. Well, he throws a knight in, but now a little combination. Rook takes, queen takes. If he takes with the rook, easy peasy. You simply trade queens, rook takes, and the bishop drops back to d3 for the terminal pin on the rook. So he takes with the queen. But now, as my friend Sailor likes to say, the replacement rook. So now you can see this queen and knight are getting severely overloaded. This knight is charged with guarding the rook on e4. After he goes queen over to h4, trying to hang on, you can see the queen is simply overloaded. She's helping guard the knight on f6. She's also helping to guard the rook. It's just a matter of chop, chop, chop. We start with the bishop, and on rook takes, and queen takes check, extra piece and pawn, Youngworth resigned. So that was a very good example of the bishop pair at work in the early middle game, where we opened up some nice diagonals and got to his king and zapped his pieces. Now, let's go on to the next game. Aha! Now the next game was against a very good player, future grandmaster. As I mentioned, a lot of the young talents, including Kudrin and Gurevich, who I saw a lot in New York, and we were all good, respectful competitors, you know, when we were younger. And they both became very good grandmasters. So, here, I'm white, playing Kudrin, and one of the things I'd mentioned previously is that sometimes you can kind of design your opening system so you can try and get the bishop pair like out of the opening. So openings like queen c2 Nimzo. Here, queen b3 against a queen's Indian, and now you can see, but pluses and minuses. He also gets a nice outpost on e4 and a nice diagonal for his bishop. Well, I'll go ahead and castle. So now we're kind of putting the question to him. If he wants to take the knight, it's kind of like now or never. He takes with the bishop. That allows him to maintain control of the e4 square. Pawn up. So now it's a textbook case of white has this extra center and the bishop pair, but black has a beautiful diagonal. He's got a semi-closed position, which is very good for the knights, and he's got control of the e4 square. So, one of the Steinitz principles is use your pawns to evict those enemy knights out of central outpost. And now I would say one thing. He does have the move a5 in. This pawn would actually be better in some ways back on a7. Why is that? Because it would give added strength and it would keep the position a little more closed. As we'll see, I'm able to use that factor. So first things first, f3, give the knight the boot, knight back, and e4. So it's more like I have kind of a same-ish Nimzo-Indian type structure for white. Okay, but he's still going to try to barricade in. He does that, of course. He didn't want me to pin, and then he would have to think about how to break the pin. Put the rook on the half-open file. Now queen e7. Very flexible move. That gives him options to castle either direction. Well, here I play the kind of move that players with limited strategic understanding often play against me when I play an opening like the Gingy Indian, where I give my opponent the bishop pair and double pawns. But in this situation, there is kind of a concrete idea, is that I'm contemplating playing e5, and then if I ever take and he has to take with a pawn, we will see that the b6 pawn is weakened. Plus, this bishop doesn't have much of a future out the other direction. So it's kind of strange. And the other point is that if I provoke him into playing e5, well, then this knight on e1 can go to c2 to e3, and then has very pleasant options of either going on up to f5 or to d5, okay? So, of course, when you have the bishop pair, you want to open up the position. He goes in and plays e5. Now here I start cartwheeling the knight in. He goes knight over. Now his knight is contemplate going to f4. Well, as we saw before and we heard from Karpov, quite often a pawn on g3 can cover those squares. Now he could have contemplated, I kind of expected queen to g5. Threatens a sack, but of course I could contemplate pulling the bishop back to c1 to give him the boot. In the game, he played g6. Well, now I went ahead and struck. I played pawn to c5. And here's what I'm talking about when I mentioned that this pawn up on a5 would actually be better off being back on b6, because it would give him more support and make it much less appetizing for this attempted attack down the b file. And pawn to c5 is actually a true pawn sacrifice. He plays a4 first. But now, very tricky move, queen to c4. It looks illegal because it looks like he can play bishop to a6, which he can. But on bishop a6, I have two responses. I could either play queen d5 and hit the rook in the corner because there's no knight on f6, or I could play queen takes a4. Then on bishop takes d3, queen takes rook check, and possibly take the other rook on h8. He'll take something else, but I come out ahead. So, and that's key because it's necessary for me to have that square. Well, in the game he takes, I recapture. He offers to trade queens. He sees that, of course, on knight takes c5, I'm just going to play bishop takes, queen takes, pawn takes, and rook takes. And again, on bishop a6, queen takes a4 is okay. So, he offers to trade queens to try and bail out. But now, I just mobilize my rook, He goes bishop a6, trying to force some liquidation to relieve the pressure. And notice again, castling ran into problems on either side. So now I go ahead and trade. I damage his pawn structure, cartwheel my knight in, and here I played, I think, a very nice idea. I think at that time I'd studied a lot of Korchnoi games, and Korchnoi was great at sacrificing pawns for the initiative. So we leave the pawn sitting there on c5 for the taking, but it's all about penetration with our pieces. Now, of course, if he takes with the knight, well, we just play bishop takes, pawn takes, and maybe even knight takes this guy on e5, then we're hitting the g6 guy. So he takes with the pawn, but now it's all about penetration. Rook in. Yes, I'm a pawn down, but look at the 4 white pieces. Both rooks on open files, 1 rook on the 7th, the knight on c6, the bishop functioning. Well, he comes back and gives back the pawn. But again, Kudrin's a very tough player. He plays rook up, h7, a little lateral defense, trying to hang in there. But now I found a very nice touch. You want to always look at squares and weak pawns. And so here, rook to d6 takes advantage of the availability of the d6 square, and I touch the pawn on e6. And now the problem is if he moves the knight back to f8, yes, that guards the 1 pawn, but after I trade rooks, his knights are totally dislodged, and I can seriously think about just nipping the guy on c5. So what does he do? He plays rook f7. I take the pawn, and then he runs with the king. Now, what to do? Tricky play. I collect a second pawn. I play knight takes. Knight takes, and bishop takes, and king over. And here's the point. When you play rook takes, if he takes with the king, you can take the knight on e5. If he takes with the knight, you can take the knight on f6. In the game, he plays knight f3 check, always looking for opportunities. This is the hallmark of a strong player. They don't just roll over. They try to make it as difficult as possible for you. Well, king up. Go to f2. I didn't want to go to g2 and let him go knight e1 check, and then I have to chase him some more. He gets back, and he's attacking my rook. What to do? Well, got to use our bailout. Rook e7 check. Saves the rook and recoups this guy. Now, what's the material? Well, I've managed to secure 2 extra passed pawns. They're a little disjointed, but I also have the bishop that operates on both sides of the board. So yes, I gave back my bishop here, but I got something in return. So now, rook over. Again, the mark of a good player. He wants counterplay. He wants to go check, take this, and have a passed a pawn. Well, I just go ahead and secure this pawn, get it out of harm's way. He goes back with the knight. If he goes in with the rook, I could even play a3 and put the bishop on b4. But once the knight goes back, now play h4. I keep that knight out of the g5 square. Remember our Steinitz principle. Use your pawns to take away squares from their knight. He goes check, drop the king back. The reason there is that if he goes knight to f6 to g4, there's no check. Knight has to come back into the game, but now look at this beautifully centralized bishop radiating towards his king and in position to help march our c-pawn up the board. Well, he gives it another shot there, but now bishop e5. Now the bishop totally dominates the knight. Well, pawn up, trying to trade a pair of pawns, but that's okay. And now we get our c-pawn going. So now someone on his team got to get over there and play a little d. He goes pawn up. He's still trying to get rook in and knight takes pawn check to get some counterplay, but we just keep pushing. His counterplay is going to be very slow. If he goes rook in, we just push again, and on knight takes pawn check, well, we could take and then push, and when he goes rook behind it, we go rook over, rook check, and promote and win the rook. So now he goes rook over. But now bishop in. He gets the knight back in the game. The king, as we've mentioned many times before, the king in the endgame has an attacking and defensive value of 3.5 points. Plan is simple. King up to d4, pawn to e5, or king into f4, f5, abuse the knight, maybe even go to g6, or just help support our pawn. The only thing we got to watch out for is a knight fork. Well, at this point, he wanted to trade off my rook. But then, I was very happy about this because trade, knight takes, and bishop to e5. This theme of a bishop on e5 dominating a knight on e8 has always been one of my favorites. Bobby Fischer beat William Addison, a very successful lawyer, in 2 games. One of the games Karpov covered when he covered, Bobby Fischer's games, but the other game was a textbook rook and bishop versus rook and knight, Fischer ending, and in the final position he got something like this, where the bishop on e5 dominated the knight on e8. So I'd always remembered that game from my childhood. I loved it, and I was so happy that I got to replicate it. So now, of course, Kudrin doesn't give up. He comes up, but this passed pawn is just simply too strong. King up. Anywhere the knight comes, you're just going to chop it off. He makes a waiting move. We go ahead and push the pawn. He goes back with the king. We snip another one, and at this point, Kudrin resigned. And I have to say, Kudrin and Gurevich, both very, very classy guys. They were great friends during that whole period when we all lived in New York. And myself, Fedorowicz, Rode, we would have many, many battles amongst us. And so that was a great time for all of us young players developing. But this was one of my best wins ever against Kudrin, where the bishop totally dominated the knight at the end. Okay? And also a good example of getting the bishop pair right out of the opening, which, at that time I played d4. So let's see. Close that one. And what we got next? Aha. Now in the 1980s, right around early 80s, I forget, somewhere around 82, I got to play in a tournament in Tbilisi, Georgia. And at that time, Americans did not do well in Russian tournaments because these Russians tended to be extremely underrated on FIDE. For example, Gavrikov had a huge score in that tournament, something like 10 wins and 5 or 6 draws, and he won the tournament going away. But I managed to tie for second, and I think during that tournament I beat Grandmaster Gufeld, and I also beat Gergenditsi. And then I won a couple of the games against, players that had not, I think Merced later became a Grandmaster, and I won my game with him. But anyway, here I'm playing Gergenditsi, and he plays e4. I play e6. He plays knight f3, which never really saw knight f3 against the French defense, and then knight out. So I'm kind of on my own here, but knight out. But a game like this really shows when you play an opening, it's very, very important to understand your strategic ideas as well as memorize variations, because this position, I'd never seen this exact position before, and later I found maybe he'd won a game or two. But anyway, look, French defense. White has a pawn chain. You got to attack the base of the pawn chain. Okay, but now bishop e5. That struck me as a little bit unusual. And I think previously maybe someone had played a6 and then he took the knight and then he was able to control the d4 square or something. But I just played knight c6. I'm like, hey, you want to give up your bishop, double the pawns, give me the a6 diagonal? I'm in. And then besides, if you double my pawns, I'll have a half-open b file. But more importantly, I thought I'll have an extra pawn to chip away at your center with. Well, of course, chess is a battle of ideas. He castled. Maybe bishop g5 deserves a thought, because in principle, if white's going to trade a bishop, he should go for the dark square bishop trade. Anyway, bishop e7, rook e, I castle, and he goes knight back to e2. So, queen b6. Now, we're very good timing here, because we're putting the question to the bishop. And notice he can't play bishop d3 and try and sack, because I'll play pawn to c4, trapezoid the bishop, and he will have to sack somewhere. So, very good timing. So he goes ahead and backs up this way. But now I go ahead and take here. And now the timing is such that if he tries to recapture, he's got to be careful about little tactics where I try to steal his pawn on e5. What does he do here? He takes with this knight. But now I go knight c5, still going after his light squared bishop. Because keep in mind, this is the guy that he really wants to get back here to this diagonal and attack me with. He goes back. But now I play f6. f6 after c5 is the most common pawn break for the black team in the French defense. He plays bishop f4. Good Nimzovich stuff, over protecting the strong point pawn. Well, I take. He takes with the bishop. Obviously, the rook was attacking the bishop, so that was very timely capture because he wasn't able to take with the knight, which would have been very smooth. But now I change gears. I cartwheel the knight into e4. This is one of the textbook plans for counterplay because now there's veiled pressure against that f2 pawn. Well, he goes bishop back to g3. I go king over. I mean, at some point, I'd like to get the e5 pawn break, but I don't want this bishop takes pawn to happen with check. So king over, nice safety move. He goes c3. Pretty clear he's planning to bring his bishop back to c2. Well, I play bishop f6. It's all about controlling the e5 square, the d4 square. He goes rook e2. Not sure why he didn't play bishop c2. Anyway, now I go for the bishop pair. I take the bishop on g3. He takes toward the center, of course. And pawn to e5. Bing, bada, boom. The French defense player dream to get the e5, d5 pawn duo. And of course, if he plays knight takes c6, pawn takes. And when he tries to take on e5 a couple of times, then we see the hidden pressure against the f2 pawn. So now this is a great example of using, well, I say great, anyway, it's a good example of using tactics to supplement my strategic goals. Right now I have a backward pawn on a half open file. What do I want? And also we have what's called hanging pawns. Well, who was it, Nimzovich or someone, some great thinker saying that hanging pawns want to advance and they're whispering to each other who should go first. Well, in this case, pawn to e5. He has limited options with the knight. The knight can hobble back to c2, or he can trade on c6. But as we said, if he trades on c6, pawn takes, and he just adds to my center. And he's not able to capture on e5 without losing his f2 pawn on the end. So again, tactics to help with the strategy. Now, he is threatening the d5 pawn now, but full speed ahead. Now, why is this so good? Because he would like to go knight to d4. That would be the dream for white, to barricade, blockade, and then eventually attack my center pawns. But tactics. If he goes knight to d4, I put the light squared bishop up on g4, and I pin him. So he goes knight back to h2, I believe. The point being, he didn't want to allow the bishop g4 pin. Well, now, full speed ahead. Pawn to d4. Remember, when you got the bishop pair, you want to blast it open, the position. So now, tactics again. He can take on e4, but of course I'm taking on c3. He could take on d4, but then knight takes. So let's see what he does. He takes. I take. Now here, if he takes on e4, I can play knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, rook moves, and then bam, queen takes on f2 check. Okay, probably I win a pawn, but I shatter his king. So he trades. But now I take with the bishop. Now we can really see this bishop on d4 as a total stud. I got 3 hits on the f2 pawn, and I'm attacking the b2 pawn. So he clearly doesn't really relish the idea of rook takes c4. I'll probably take, I don't know, maybe I'll take on b2 first. or I could take on f2 and then g3. He hunkers down. Queen over. Third defender on the f2 pawn, plus he wants to hold me up, blasting him with e3. What did I do here? Just a little quiet move, bishop d7. Well, it's clear that bishop needs to come out. But this also has a little insidious threat of bishop to b5, trying to chase him off, protecting the f2 pawn. Well, very good. Now if I go bishop b5, he can meet me with bishop c4. He's doing his best to hunker in. But now, a little quiet move, rook f6. Again, very dangerous. He can't take on e4 because I have bishop takes f2 check, and timing. Timing is key. I threaten just to double and bring a fourth hit and overload his defensive capabilities. Well, he hustles back with the knight. It's pretty clear he wants to get that knight up to e3, and like the little boy with his finger in the dike, he wants to try and plug the hole. But bring the heat, baby. Now you can see I'm all doubled up. I got 4 hits on that f2 pawn. Notice that rook c2, going for the old lateral defense, probably doesn't cut it because I go bishop b5. And then remember, before he had the bishop c4 defense, but there I can trade, overload him, and power blast in. So he brings the knight. Critical moment. He's got possibilities of knight to d5, okay, with a little fork. So even when things are going your way, you always have to be asking, what's he up to? What does he want? What's he trying to do to me? So many players get so wrapped up in their plans, they forget that the enemy likes to make moves too. So, kind of crunch time. Karpov told me once, no matter how well you play strategically, the game still comes to a tactical crescendo where you got to figure out how to break through. Okay? And so this is case in point here. I mean, yeah, I don't really want to spend time with moves like a5. Again, he might try some fork action. Okay? But here you have it. Bam! Rook takes f2. Well, of course, if he takes with the rook, simply bishop takes e3, and I win a solid pawn, plus I put him in a nasty pin. Okay? So he has to take with the queen. Rook takes. King takes. And for me, this is hard, because I'm never sure which is better, the 2 rooks or queen and a pawn. And it really is a case-by-case basis. However, in this scenario, I have a queen and a pawn for the 2 rooks, but I also have the bishop pair, and he's in a nasty pin with his e3 knight. So the rooks don't have access as long as I don't let him sneak in with rook c8 mate or something. So, h5. Well, that kind of gets rid of the checkmate ideas, and now I might be back to playing something like bishop to g4, and I really got him in the crosshairs. Well, he goes up for a little lateral defense. I hit him with bishop g4. Now, of course, the rook has to go to e1. If it goes to d2, the e3 knight hangs. He goes here, and now, boom! His knight's still pinned. I put a pawn in my pocket because on rook takes, I have queen f6 check. And this shows the power of the queen in the open board. Well, he goes bishop in. He's attacking my pawn on e4, tit for tat. Not so easy to see how we're going to defend that guy. But queen check and bishop pin. Very delicate play here, because if he goes bishop takes on b7, I have queen back to b6, double attack on e3, hitting the bishop. If he goes bishop to e4, which I think might be what he did in the game, I may have something like queen to e5, trying to zap him this way. So he goes king h2. Now what? Okay, I got my queen and my 2 pawns, but he is threatening to collect both pawn, a pawn on b7 or here. Now I could play b5 and try to make a run for it, but don't forget his knight is now threatening to take my bishop. I don't want to lose that guy. So first things first, queen to e5. He chops my bishop. But then I take his bishop. So now I still have queen and 2 pawns for the 2 rooks. He goes here, attacking my queen. But now, a very nice move, queen to g5. We hit the knight, and we get ready to play pawn to h4, trying to expose his king again. He drops the knight back. Pawn to h4 anyway. He goes rook check. Well, let's see. If he plays rook takes on e4, what's the deal? The deal is you go pawn takes pawn check. If he goes knight takes, you have queen back to h6 with an h-file mate. And if he goes rook takes e4, you go pawn takes check. If he goes king to h3, then you have queen f5 check, hitting the king, the rook, and x-raying the rook and the knight. Quadruple attack. So he goes check. King up. Now it's the same theme. If he goes rook takes pawn, we just go pawn takes pawn check, and on king h3, queen f5 quadruple attack. Okay? So he goes rook takes. Oh! Well, now we go pawn takes pawn check. If he goes knight takes, it's queen to h6 check, and he has to cough up the knight. Then you take that, he has to go over. So let's see what he did in the game. He took, but now queen h6 check. And you can see the power of this bishop cutting the king off. And he threw in the knight. We took. I think he actually resigned already at this point. But here, bishop check. And maybe this is the point where he resigned. You got the old triple attack. Both rooks, king, power of the queen on the open board combined with the bishops was just, I thought, a really excellent middle game example of the bishop pair. But again, everything led up to this moment right here where he's trying to hunker in, and we had to break through with rook takes, rook takes, king takes, and then h5, the power of the queen on the open board combined with the bishop pair, dicing and splicing. So, game against a Russian grandmaster, Georgian grandmaster, I was actually pretty proud of. And the last game, from much more modern times, very good friend of mine, Delbert Sa. He's about 1900 player, repairs air conditioning, heating units up and down the coast in Florida for about 25-30 years from Colombia. And this is actually just a training game, but I thought it had nice bishop pair concept. So again, nothing too exciting in the bishop opening. I played a3, probably not the most theoretically precise, but I didn't want to be annoyed with knight to b4. So a3, knight out, both sides just developing. I do just a slow, casual crawl. He's playing very cleverly. He's keeping his options open as to which way he's going to castle. Well, now I go ahead and play c4. Take advantage of the fact that his knight is blocking his c-pawn. So now, if he tries to play e5 or castle queenside, he's got to be concerned about c4 trapping his dark squared bishop. So basically, he has to admit queen e7 didn't quite work out the way he'd hoped. But now I get the knight out. So he's still playing the waiting game. I'm thinking now I'm ready to play c5 maybe. If he takes, I can take with the knight. So he goes back with the bishop. But now I go ahead and kick his knight. Now you can see I've got a very nice space advantage and kind of abusing him a bit. Queen out, pawn up. And so those last 3 moves was a very good example of one little problem leading to another, okay? And this is kind of a feature that we saw like in Karpov's games where the guy thinks he's escaping, but one little problem after another, okay? So, thank you there, Zevich. Let's see. So, now you can see white has more center. The white bishop's certainly looking better than the black bishops. And the knight on a5 is on the rim, and the c6 square is weak. So, bishop c3, targeting that guy. Well, backs it up, and then I get that beautiful square on c6. Well, queen up. Now go ahead and castle. He goes bishop back to d6. Queen a6. harassing his knight. Knight goes back to d8, and knight back to e5, harassing his queen. Not sure these last few moves were the most precise. Like here, he should play queen e7 probably. Anyway, he gives up the bishop. So now I can at least say I've gotten the bishop pair out of my opening maneuvers. I play e4. Well, of course, as we just said earlier, when you have the bishop pair, you want to open the position. Take, knight takes. Now, he could go hunting with a move like queen to d3. But that's probably a bit risky with his queen in the middle, but but he's got some problems on the diagonal. I could play something like, I don't know, maybe just move the knight and threaten. Not sure what I was going to do if he'd play queen d3. That might have been his best chance to confuse things. But in the game, he offered to trade queens. So of course now we're happy to trade because we got more space and we got a beautiful pair of bishops working in the endgame. Well, knight up, bishop back, pawn to c5, bishop back, rook up, and now pawn to a5, a4, and pawn to a5 is coming soon. Well, king up, trying to hunker in and defend. But h4. Again, as we said with Steinitz, we use our pawns to deprive the enemy knights of squares. Knight has to go back to h7. But what's its future from h7? The best it can hope for is to go to f8 and then maybe over to d7. Well, meanwhile, on the other side of town, while he's disconnected, pawn to a5. Pawn to f6, trying to get some activity. Yeah, we could play f4 and on pawn takes, but pawn takes, and rook to a6. So you can now finally see some concrete results of white's work. The pawn on b6 simply can't be defended because of the poor communication with the black pieces. Well, rook to d7. Take the pawn. Now we have a certifiable connected past b5 pawn. Rook down, trying to get counterplay. But when you're winning, you don't have to go for crazy complications. Just continue nice solid play. Bishop takes. Now you can see the pawn on g7 is under pressure. Finally, this knight gets back into the game. Well, rook over. The rook prepares to come to the 7th. This rook finally starts to get into the game. But now, rook to a7 check. Rook back. And pawn to b6. Now we can really see the power of this passed pawn, because if he trades, pawn takes, and pawn to a8, supported by the long arm of the law, the bishop. Well, the knight hustles back to try and play defense. Now I guess we could just play b7 and ram it in, but one more nice little touch, rook to d1, and I think black resigned here, because this attacks the rook is pinned, and we encourage him to trade. And after he trades, pawn takes, and we can see these knights simply can't cope with us playing pawn to the 8th and going for the full enchilada. So anyway, I like this finish on the game, rook d1, rook takes, pawn takes, and this is where my friend Delbert resigned. And by the way, I would say that Delbert has been just a fantastic friend in the years since I moved to Florida from up in New York. And really great guy, totally loves chess, super enthusiastic about it, and just a pleasure to have him as a friend. So that was one of our training games. But I thought it was kind of a textbook example of play with the two bishops and attacking on the queen side. So we got a game, Mr. Zevich, and let's see. And of course, playing him rated is like rating suicide, because he's way too good in the opening. Case in point right here. Case in point right here. The guy is like way too good in the opening. Fantastic. How come I'm not getting any volume? I see. Not even hearing the ICC ding. Now I'm behind on time. I was wondering about knight to g5 here. Is this crazy? Probably. Probably just dubious. Probably just dubious. Doesn't feel like it should offer anything. Yeah, I think that's the right choice for him. Korchnoi was playing these kind of isolated queen pawn positions at one time. Well played. Have no advantage whatsoever here as far as I can tell, just tick-tocking around. Well now though, at least maybe I have some hope for something. Not sure what, but some hope for something. But I don't think it's anything. Well, maybe not. Maybe I had something else. Good move. Okay. Yeah, I don't really have a convenient way to defend that guy. Now here I'm pushing the envelope just a touch, trying to create some winning chances. Probably not a good idea, but we all get a little crazy sometimes. Whoa, what was that? Meowza. He's given me a connected pass pawn, sort of. But my position's still a little loosey-goosey. Gotta admit, still a little loosey-goosey. Yeah, now he's got his bishops working. Mad props. The guy really plays good. Good move there. So I don't even have an extra pawn anymore, I have to say. Life is full of disappointments. Not sure about that move, but what the heck. Flew off our fingertips. We did it. Oh, nasty. This is a real tit-for-tat battle. Great game as always, sir. A horrible rating proposition for me to play you rated. You're way too good. Okay, Foxy openings, last game, and then we're going to call it a night. And of course I get black, which means I'm going to be up against it from the get-go, go-go. What to do? Now I'm more or less okay. I've avoided the dreaded Trumpowski. Hey, Zevich, thanks for the games. Oh, we have Eva Pereira, Brazilian fitness champion. Thanks for dropping in. This, I think, is more or less okay. Okay, so we get this type of position that one could get from the Caro-Kann or the Nimzo Indian. or even the Grunfeld. Very classic. Okay, I don't know much, but I know I got to get castled. So in theory, this type of position is supposed to be equal. In fact, my bishop f5, though, might not have been most precise. Maybe I was supposed to play knight a5, bishop to e6, and control these squares. Okay, look. Better late than never. Although knight e4 is another option here. But let's do it this way. Let's go here. I mean, in theory, knight e4 is supposed to be some kind of freeing move. In reality, who knows? Knight c4 was another option there for me. You always have to think about if he takes and goes queen b3, hitting your rook, hitting your b7 pawn. He's playing in a very restrained manner today. Now I'm basically one move away from having a really sweetheart of a position with either bishop d5. Well, sweetheart. I mean, if you're Yasser Seirawan or Karpov and love to play against isolated pawns. So if I get one move to play either bishop d5 or knight takes bishop and then bishop d5, I think black can be, in the words of Andras Sidorian, black is okay. I think this is the moment. Let's take the bishops. Now, interesting. He's got moves like either queen to... I thought queen a4 or a3. Oh, and now if I go queen b6, he's got the fork with knight d7. So, we're not going to be doing that. I can feel I'm getting a little woozy. Do we like this one? Or this one? Let's go here. Yeah, I see a good square for my queen. Yeah, I can feel I'm getting a little tired. Anyway, what I need to do now, I need to play rook at f to d8, cover that d7 square, start... oh! Definitely, I'm in. Let's trade. And do we want to play rook down? Or just double? Okay, now what? Obviously we can be happy with the opening, but not everything's done yet. If I kick him, how do I break in? Okay, so now we're getting some bishop opposite color type action. Am I being too soft here? I can really feel I'm a bit fatigued. Whoa, whoa. Why would I put that guy there? Let's start on this side. Yeah, he wants to trade those bishops off. Can't blame him. I started to play rook down, but then he would have had a chance to go there.
Check. Check.
Anyway, good game, sir. I was about to play on king g3, rook down, and then some chances with rook g1 check, although you do have that happy hopper. But anyway, thank everyone for participating tonight. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope you enjoyed the games. And Zevich, thanks for showing up, hanging in there. Evanidi, Pierre, thank you for showing up. Foxy Openings, thanks for hanging in there, playing a few games. And see you guys next week. Should be Thanksgiving Day here in America. Thanks, everyone. And thanks to ICC for sponsoring us week after week. And thanks to Sandro for staying up late. And I will see you guys next week.